Welcome, black. Disco hard in the hit like bats. Took my Sabbath, I can relax. Like boomerang, I come right back. Like boomerang, I come right back. Just like yo-yos, come right back. Don't be no-shows, come right back. Don't be loco, come right. Look, welcome, black.
What is up, world? How y'all doing? My name is George.
And I'm Kadri.
And this is
Black
on Black. Hey, yeah, we're so happy you guys are here. We know we've been gone for a few weeks. We've been gone for 2 weeks. I know some of you guys had a little PTSD. Thought we'd like disappear again for 2 years. But we're back. We're back. We had a couple, and we're black. That's right. Always and forever. But yeah, we've had a couple crazy weeks. I had 4 teeth pulled, which is a story. It is a story.
Crazy story.
But not for today, but it is a story.
Another time.
So we missed a week then, and then we just had some things come up. But we're back, promise. New things. We're dropping now podcasts on Fridays now instead of Mondays. Just kind of work better with our schedules. So be looking out for the Friday drops. But we're still back every week for the time being. And yeah, we're gonna hop on a pretty touchy subject today. But yep. I think it's gonna be really good. And I'm excited for it.
Let's see what happens.
Let's see what happens. This is one of those topics. This this phrase seems to be.
Let's not even say
a trigger.
Let's not even use the first word. It's not even necessary to use the first part.
It's a trigger for so many people, especially of Caucasian European descent. But this idea of privilege. When we get like that dun dun dun, the idea of privilege, white privilege, but really just idea of privilege.
We're just gonna focus on privilege.
Just privilege. Let's just talk about privilege.
We don't need to talk about white.
And this is a topic that you suggested talking about, which I'm super amped on. And so yeah, we said this before in like our first episode back. We just want to invite you guys in to. This is for all of us to be able to learn, gain perspective, and kind of invite you into a space where we can have a difficult maybe conversation that maybe you haven't had before. When I say conversation, obviously it's right now it's very one way, but we want to hear from you guys. This is something that we on the Instagram prompt I put out as something that was kind of hit back to me a few times. So something that I know a good deal of you guys want to talk about. So. Yeah, this idea of privilege. I see you have the definition. We're just gonna hop right into it because this is a full episode. So hit us. What's Webster's definition?
What's Oxford?
What's the Oxford?
What's he saying? So this is. I just looked it up on Google. I mean, like in a sociological or whatever sense. Yeah, sociological sense. This isn't the definition in that sense, but. Privilege, as is, just means a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group.
We'll
start from there. And then, let that definition expand into just what you like. I mean, I feel like we all understand that's what privilege means. That's a pretty good thing.
Yeah, but again, it is a word that does. It has a lot of baggage to it. I'll put it that way.
Yeah, I mean,
why do you think that is? Why do you think it's a trigger word? I think
the thing is, like, when I hear privilege, I guess this is a way to describe it. I think a lot of people, there's almost this negative connotation with having anything in your life that wasn't like personally
earned,
blood, sweat, and tears earned by you or something.
Right.
And I think it's interesting to me because, so for example, something I'll hear very often, maybe you'll say something to somebody, right? And be like, I have this and this and this issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then they'll say, like, that's such a first world problem or something like that.
Right, yeah.
And then maybe you'll make another complaint, right? and they'll say, well, at least you don't live in X third world country.
Right.
That's privilege.
Right.
Like
totally.
That in I think sometimes privilege is like relevant to discuss in a certain connotation.
Right.
And sometimes it's really not.
Right.
You know? I'm trying to think. Like, say that you're talking about, like, conditions living in America, right? Say that you were talking about that. Say we're talking about, it's not, I dislike that we have certain kind of, let's say it's like some kind of infrastructure in America.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Context that we're talking about is America.
Right.
And the society that we have.
Totally.
And the conditions that we live in. And somebody says, well, you know, the poorest person, well, at least you're not living in, like, I don't know, I can't think of a third world country off the top of my head, but, like, some third world country.
Totally.
That's not relevant because it's not in the context of what you're discussing.
For sure.
If we're talking about things, like, in that context, in an American context, and you're like, I don't know, maybe a kid's like, oh, I don't know. I think there's just certain contexts where it makes sense to bring it up, and there's contexts where it doesn't make sense to bring it up because it's not like, well, it adds to the story. Obviously true. Yeah, for sure.
It like gives, when you say context is important. Like like sometimes when you paint a picture, I think to be able to give a fuller or more truer picture of what's happening, there is that context, and privilege sometimes is it's like. So like I feel like a very real example I could give, and I'm gonna use this person. They're a real person, a famous person, but they'll never hear this podcast, so it's fine. But like there was a while back, there was I don't even remember which one, but it was one of the Kardashians, and there was like, oh, she's the first like self-made millionaire woman or something like there was some article or something, you know, she's the first. Or maybe it was billionaire. I don't remember what it was. I think it was billionaire.
Yeah. First. You're talking about Kylie Kardashian. Is it Kylie Jenner?
I don't know any.
It's Kylie Jenner, and she has the makeup.
Yeah, for sure. So I don't actually know any. My wife loves them, but I don't know any. But I remember it was like she's the first self-made billionaire, and it was like, well, like the context is that she's not really self-made in the sense that her family,
like it's relevant to discuss her,
right? Her family
there was conditions
definitely
that definitely gave her an advantage,
which is not like not a knock against her.
Doesn't make
it's
it bad.
Just it adds context to the sense of, well, the reason why she was able to, one of the contributing factors for her to be able to reach that milestone so fast and so well was because her family name definitely had helped her. It was privilege, like it gave her privilege, and again. I feel like what happens is, like, I feel like anyone can look at like that situation and go, that's true. Like, there's so much truth to that. Like, no one would just go, like, oh, just do what Kylie Jenner did. It's like, well, you probably can't. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, as a, you know, to look at a woman and just say, well, just do it. Like, she did it. It's like, well, most people probably can't just get up one day and decide to do that, make a, you know, makeup line or whatever and be as successful as she is just off the bat, right? Everyone can look at that example and go, that's true. There's truth to that. And so yes, Kylie or whatever her name is, Kendall, Kylie, whatever, has privilege, and that gave her success. But what happens is that when then you apply that to say something like white privilege or male privilege or different things in that context, what happens is that there's still truth to that, but then there's a trigger that immediately happens when you say, especially when you go about like white privilege, you say something, well, there's white privilege involved. And then it's like an immediate like wall, a defense that goes up when you're talking to generally, you know, white people about that goes, there's no such thing as white privilege. Like, you know, like, and I feel like this is like where I see this come into play a lot is people will say something like, well, like what privilege do I have? Like I grew up poor, or I grew up, you know, I've had people go, well, I grew up like, and I'm like, yeah, you might have actually grown up poorer than me. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like in that context, in the sense of like, yeah, like it's not, privilege doesn't mean that white people don't have hardships or don't like, you know what I'm saying? Like that, like everything's just easy and gravy for every white person because you're born. That's not the definition. That's not what that phrase or that term means. And that's like, if it's being used correctly, that's not the application. But I feel like that's what people hear because I have conversations with people and they go, "Oh, so you think my life's just easy? You think it's just easy just being white?" Or I grew up, I had to work hard for my position. And I'm like saying, I'm not saying that you didn't have to work hard for your position. I'm not saying you didn't have to work hard to get your job. I'm not saying you didn't have to, X, Y, and Z, which I feel like that's the filter people hear that phrase through sometimes is because you believe in white privilege. You believe that my life is somewhat easier, or I don't have hardships, or but that seems to be a trigger. That seems to be like a roadblock that phrase seems to have a lot of like pushback on.
I think, yeah, and I think a part of it too is that the term white privilege is a very academic and don't hear me saying this as elite, like this elitism thing, like people are stupid, you guys are lesser than because you don't know all this stuff or whatever. It's a phrase, it's like a term that started as a very complex, it's representative of a series of complex social phenomena and based off of years and years of cultural norms that have developed through the history of slavery and black people's place as second-class citizens throughout the Jim Crow era, and it takes into account multiple different factors about our society, culturally, socioeconomically, all these different kind of platitudes or whatever, and that idea, that term that has represented all this very complex, I guess data and scientific, sociological study and stuff, has been it's become a colloquialism. Everybody just uses it in kind of really flippant and
okay, so that's the question.
Casual way.
That's a great question. I'm curious. Do you feel like the term is overused?
I think it can be misused often by people. Good. I think it's I think people kind of hear white privilege and it's just white people get more stuff than black people, and they're it's just not that simple. Right. It represents a lot of things, but it's not. I think it's super oversimplified to this place where people don't. I mean, a lot of people don't know what it represents. I don't feel like I'm even what's the right word? Qualified enough to be giving super intense, detailed information about it. I feel for a lot of the classes I took and I've studied, I feel pretty confident about my ability to describe what that means to people. Right. But so for example, I was watching this video. I don't know how true this is. It's just something I heard from some guy. It was some dude, and he was a white dude, and talking about his interaction with some black dude that came up to him. He had he has some really nice car or something, and the guy came up to him and was like, "Hey, you and your effing white privilege and stuff," just because he had a nice car and stuff.
The black guy said.
Guy said it to him, and it was that's he had this whole video ranting about it, and he's just very anti, Black Lives Matter, all this stuff or whatever. And was using that as a framework for his distaste for it and stuff. But I was that's not accurate. If somebody just comes up to you and is you're effing white privilege, that's not what that means. That's not represent. Sure, it's cool the guy has a really nice car, and there could be some factors in his life that have to do with his with his complexion and stuff that gave him the advantages to be in that place. But that contempt that the guy was showing towards him for his status and stuff, and it's just not even worth. I feel a lot of times it's not even worth saying, because people can't engage with it. People aren't willing to talk through what that means.
But
and
why,
even if you
I'm so
describe
curious
it to them,
what that is. It feels
that contempt
for me. It feels like white privilege is an important thing to talk about.
Totally
there is a lot of things that are really I guess helpful to talk about and within that umbrella of the idea of privilege. But I agree with you 100%. It feels like it's so hard to even, I feel like I have to like set up a conversation to where like people won't get triggered by that phrase, because if I even say the word privilege or white privilege, I just know there's a pretty large segment of people that are just going to disengage. And I'm so like, as someone who loves to look at history and just kind of I love like sociology and I love people, like I hate living in it, but I'm very like fascinated by just the like knee-jerk reaction of people to disengage off of that word, and the like just the baggage, the like the reaction that comes from that word, especially I feel like over the past like 5-6 years, like it's just exasperated like tenfold. But
yeah, can I speak to that?
Yeah, for sure.
I feel like I'm not like, I don't know, but some things that I suspect. One thing I think is like there's a very heavy and it's like a rhetorical device, I think, to like delegitimize the plights of black people and stuff. And I think it's always been a thing. Actually, I was reading this, but it's called it's like like the victim mentality narrative that like black people are like victims and stuff. Like I remember
that's good.
I was reading this thing and it was talking
about that, bro.
I was reading this thing and it was talking about how back in like freaking like the Jim Crow era, so during the civil rights movement and stuff, when I can't remember exactly what the situation was, but it was like somebody asked the question like this was like pre-Voting Rights Act,
right,
like before black people could even vote. It's like, oh, at what point do we get to a place where black people they've got enough?
Right.
Like back then,
right.
Think about how absurd that is, and how many times you've heard people still ask you those kind of questions.
Right. Yeah.
I've had multiple people. I'm not
totally.
I know this is anecdotal, but I've had multiple people be like, "Oh, at what point is it going to be good enough for black people?"
Right.
My answer is always when we're like treated the same.
Right.
Like I don't care. I'm not trying to get ahead of you.
Right.
Like I'm like when
equality.
Well, I'm sorry. Let me rephrase that. When there aren't exploitative parts of our system that disadvantage black people, and we could have a longer conversation. I can have a more detailed conversation with people that actually care to hear about that. Right. I'm not gonna get in a fight with people over that kind of stuff.
But I love what you said. And I want to keep on that, because I think that's another thing that I hear. So
this is one part of it. I have a couple of more, but go for it. Keep going.
I feel like that's what people. That's another thing I hear. Such a response is like, kind of this idea of like, oh, well, you're just playing the victim, like just pull yourself up by your bootstraps, kind of like, idea. And like this idea of like when people talk, when, black people, or not just black people, but when people are trying to engage in a narrative about privilege, one of the like strong kind of rebuttals is, oh, well, you're just playing the victim. Like if you just like, there's plenty of chances in America for you to like overcome whatever that is. And the more that you like cry about privilege, the more you'll stay. And it's just like, again, it's this very weird thing where now I hate the word victim. Like I would never ever call myself a victim, or really any like black. I wouldn't call black people a victim. Yeah, but it's interesting, like where now you're taking the person who has an issue and you're now making like the person who like was done wrong against is now the like you know what I'm saying? Like they've now become the like.
Here's the thing.
It's such a like weird thing of like. I don't feel like and very rarely do I feel like people of color are, when they're talking about privilege, are saying, I'm a victim, like treat me like, you know what I'm saying? Like they're not, it's just really a thing of like, hey, just treat us better. Like, or again, in the idea of privilege, it's like, hey, can you lever when you have these places, these platforms of privilege, like, don't disparage us for not having them, which I feel like that's the thing that bugs me the most about the idea of privilege. It's like when you get in these like, I don't want to say arguments, but when you get in these situations where like people are they'll like attack black people for not doing something or like, oh, like, okay, well, look at like what's happening in your communities. And it's like, but understand that like there's historical context to the reason that is.
Yeah.
And so, yes, we want to strive to make those things better, but for you to like just disregard that privilege plays a part in that, it's just so defeating to be like, yeah, like there can be a middle ground where we go, hey, like we as a society or we as a community want to do better in certain areas, but also acknowledge that there are actively systems and historical like repercussions of like there's a reason why people like a community is in the cycle. Like there's a reason, like one that we'll probably talk about in length later of like fatherlessness. That's something everyone talks about, fatherlessness in the Black community. Well, there was actively been systems for hundreds of years to remove Black men from their homes. And so for you to like just harp on Black people without acknowledging the fact that America, the justice system, the legal system, like there's so many active systems that have disparaged Black men specifically, and plays a major role in why Black fatherlessness is so high. Yeah. So yes, we want to improve Black fatherlessness. I've never heard a Black person go, nah. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like Black people, like, yeah, we want to encourage Black men to be at home and different things. We want to encourage Black men to not be in jails and different things. Of course, that's something that Black community is always fighting for. But for you to have that critique about Black communities, but not go, well, there's also a reason why that is, and that's not fair, or that's not right. It's just like, okay, come on. Like, please, like there's a level of empathy that you have to have. And that's not saying we're playing the victim, but it is saying like there's historical context.
There's conditions that incentivize things like that to happen.
100%. And that's those are the things that bug me, is when people just act like those things don't exist. And it's like, but that, like, you have to acknowledge these things.
Well, I think people think that, like, don't recognize, like, I think there's this idea that, like, somehow we're, like, completely, as, like, there's just, like, people don't like to engage with the idea that, like, individuals on a very large scale are products of their environment, for one thing. Two, that any of our interactions or any of our like personal actions can be heavily dictated. That individual being an individual is like an emergent characteristic of existing within a community.
Right.
Therefore, we don't really have as much. What's the right way to describe this? We're not as much of an individual as we like to think that we are.
People are product of their environment,
and I think that's a really hard pill to swallow.
Well, I think for America that is.
For America,
specifically,
it's much tougher.
I think that's a very like hard, because I think we have this idea like America is very individualistic just by and large, and we kind of have a very like. The American dream, like it's a very individualistic thing that's kind of a little bit unique to, I would say, Western civilization, but obviously to America. So that flies in the face of like, and MLK has a great like little interview. He talks about this, but the idea of pull yourself up by your bootstraps. And MLK goes, well, it's a cruel jest to say that to a bootless man. Yeah. And so this idea that I think a white America has, and I hate to use that term and generalize, but go with me here. This idea that white America has is like we've pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps so Black people could do it too. And I think again, where you talk about it's so good, I think that's a hard pill to swallow, is like, well, you did that individualistically because those opportunities were afforded to your community, generally as white people, and that wasn't always the case for Black people.
Sure, yeah, and I think.
And that's a hard pill for, I think, because it flies in the face of them like we're just great, like we've just we started off at the bottom, but like we've
but even like every day I say like I'm ridiculously privileged.
100%.
Like I think of all of the interactions and the teachers and people that I've gotten to encounter in my life.
100%.
I think of the place I've never had to live. I think that like I have a two-parent household and stuff like that. Like there are so many things that are completely out of our control that we don't even really think about on a daily basis that produce the kind of person we are at this moment in time.
Yes.
And I just think about like, dude, like you didn't do that.
And you don't walk around with your head down going, I'm a privileged.
Yeah, wait, hold. So this is the big thing.
On the next episode of Black on Black.
And actually, there's a lot of people that I'm close with that are like that are with it on a lot of things.
Right.
But they say a lot of stuff to me that's like evokes like this guilt about being white or something.